you want me to do it in French? Because I can do the whole thing in French.
It's like the worst episode of Long Lost Family you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
You're quite good at this, David. Like, do you feel you're getting I'm actually I'm getting a wee bit of a expert interviewer.
I really enjoy it.
What you want to book for radio are good talkers, people who can talk, people who are relaxed.
Yeah. Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, and what an intro.
Oh, that's all right, we try. It's all true, and it's all true. I haven't made any of that up. I can make a bit of if you want me to.
Where would I start? I love the way you said one or two things have been happening in the last year. I mean, it's been an absolute roller coaster.
I was doing so many technology stories, they decided to call me technology correspondent.
I am surrounded by Lego mechs, among other things, because my husband is in a meeting downstairs, and I think that he's decided his meeting is more important.
You with this guy in Greece, and he was Greek?
No, so he was actually Welsh.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought, well, if I write a book, then more people will hear about me and I'll be invited kindly on podcasts like this.
I am delighted today to welcome to the Insight podcast with HR Source a gentleman that I've known for a number of years, and he's got some exciting news, but he's also had a very, very interesting career. This is going to be a first. I was listening last night to I like listening to The Bottom Line with Evan Davis on Radio 4, and they were doing a piece on reviews. So they had a company that uses a company for their review processing. They had somebody there from Trustpilot, and it just made me think about the fact that it's not a bad way to start a podcast. This is where Mr. Potter gets very, very embarrassed. Jamie Potter is quite the lawyer, and I thought I would like to start with what somebody said about Jamie, just to embarrass him, so he can go the colour of his room. Jamie Potter is truly a delight to work with, very knowledgeable regarding both substantive law and procedure, highly organised with exceptional people skills. He is truly objective and does not shy away from giving clients clear and impartial advice, but is also exceptionally committed to fighting a corner where that is needed. He manages his team exceptionally well. I couldn't put it better myself, given what I've seen of his work and having met the guy. So, suitably embarrassed, welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much, David. That was clearly a very kind person on a good day.
Yes, and no brown envelopes were exchanged hands.
No, none whatsoever.
That's not the type of lawyer we're talking about here at all, folks.
No.
Jamie, you have an interesting background in terms of your legal career, but also location. If anybody, if sharp ears out there might detect a slight accent, could you give us a bit of background in terms of your early life and your early evolution in terms of school life and university and
so I grew up in Adelaide in Australia. There is still a slight accent. My wife and I debate whether I still have it or not. She still thinks I sound completely Australian. Most people don't pick it up. But I grew up in Adelaide. I went to the local primary school in the far northeastern suburb of Adelaide where I lived. I was very lucky to get a scholarship to Pembroke School, which was an excellent academic school in Adelaide, and spent my high school years there. And then from Pembroke, I moved to Melbourne to go to university, which was relatively unlike here, where most people move away from their hometowns to go to university. It was, at least at the time, relatively unusual in Australia. But I wanted something new. I wanted a sort of fresh start, and I wanted to experience living somewhere else. And Melbourne is one of my spiritual homes. It's a city I simply just connect with. And I went to university wanting to be a psychologist. I went to university wanting to be, I think, a criminal or forensic psychologist. And therefore, I decided to do a double degree. In Australia, when you study law straight out of school, you have to do it combined with another degree. So I decided to do an arts degree with a major in psychology, and alongside that, a law degree, which takes 5 years. And I hadn't taken a gap year, and after I'd always sort of planned that I'd do somewhere late in the degree, I might do 6 months somewhere else, maybe do an exchange with another university. I had Belgium in mind for various reasons. Leuven in Belgium as somewhere to spend 6 months or a year.
Why Belgium? I'm interested.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a good reason. This is a whole nother tangent, but I used to be an orienteer, and I was lucky enough to represent Australia at the Junior World Champs a couple of times when I was 19 and 20. And those competitions were held in Europe. They were my first trips to Europe. And for some reason, the Australian team got along really well with the Belgian team. And so I had a number of Belgian friends, and a number of them were studying at Leuven. And I felt like, well, that's it's meant to be a great university.
Anything to do with the beer?
Sorry?
Anything to do with the beer?
Well, and also the beer. Yeah, exactly. It's a nice place, nice people, nice beer. But then I came across an ad for Reprieve, for an internship with Reprieve, working on death row in the US. And I decided that's what I'd do instead. And I'd take a leave.
Louisiana?
Yeah, it was New Orleans, pre-Katrina, long time ago now, as my beard indicates. And I took a year's leave of absence so I could spend half of it in New Orleans and do a little bit of travel in the States and live there for a while, and then to spend 6 months in London, in part because that's just what Australians do.
Yeah.
And I liked it here, and so I extended my leave of absence for a year. Yeah. Ended up taking 2 years off. Met an Australian while here who told me how to apply for English law firms, how to apply for graduate positions as an Australian. I did that. I applied. Actually, by the time of the interviews, I was quite homesick and I wasn't really sure I wanted to come back, but I thought I'll do the interviews. They're good practice.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to get a position at Hogan Lovells, Lovells as it then was, now Hogan Lovells.
Wow, okay. Starting small then.
International, yeah. Starting small. I mean, I applied, effectively, I knew nothing about the UK market. And I just thought, I need a visa. I need someone who'll give me a visa. The most likely firms to give me a visa are the biggest ones. Yeah. So I'll apply to the kind of top 10 biggest firms in London. So I could come back, and lucky enough to get a position. Thought, okay, had to go back to Australia, finish my degree, qualify in Australia. 7.5 years after I started, 7 years after I started, 7.5 years after I started. And then literally the day I had the court ceremony in Australia where I qualified, I flew out that evening to start the equivalent of a training contract.
Wow.
I did 2 years. I then did 2 years. I couldn't be a trainee because I wasn't English educated or British educated. But I could I did the training program because I needed 2 years experience in order to cross qualify as an English lawyer. So I ended up qualifying something like 9.5, almost 10 years after I started university and left school.
Wow. Let me just take a little bit of a rewind back to school and early life, just because I'm curious to know, and I've got some personal experiences, but is there something that you can point to, and certainly with your psychology education and that background, whether you've self-analyzed, was there something that created this spark of justice? Defending the vulnerable. Yeah. Is there something in the background that? I have reflected on that, and I can't pinpoint a particular event. How I've described it is, I am someone who you might say is obsessed with efficiency. And I know that's a strange probably place to start in terms of justice, but ever since a young age, particularly inequality, has always struck me as unbelievably inefficient. Yeah. The idea that you that people are privileged or proceed because of sort of what they are rather than who they are and what they can do always seemed to me as being very likely not to achieve the best outcomes as
I think history has largely proven to be correct.
Yeah.
And I sort of, I know, and it might be a false memory, but I almost feel like I used to talk, not in those words and not with that anywhere near that sophisticated, but that has always been a kind of strong feeling that unfairness and inequality is inefficient and therefore unjust and doesn't help society be better. And therefore, you know, the treatment of women, treatment of the indigenous population in Australia, you know, sort of always struck me as deeply unfair and inefficient. So I've said inefficient far too many times there.
No, I mean, actually, it's really interesting. Very briefly, because this is about, you know, about me, but just by way of contrast, I'm a sort of scaled down version. Maybe I should have been a lawyer. I've taken on a few corporations in my time. Last year, I won a litigation case against Apple, all on me, Todd. I quite enjoy fighting. Weirdly, I have a similar drive, but for different reasons, I think, in as much as if I see something that is unjust or not correct or not worked out properly, and there's a corporation or an organization that is effectively putting up the shutters and saying, well, that's just the way it is. That's just, you know, more motivation than anything else for me to actually prove it wrong and actually get justice. So I'm similarly minded, but on a much smaller scale. And I point back to a time many years ago. My sister, who's a couple of years older than me, she took her 11+ qualification, which would ordinarily mean if you did well at those days, you'd go to the local grammar school, which was in Gloucester. And she did very well. She was very bright, far brighter than me, and far more academic. And she was going to be, you know, we were a pretty average middle class, just working class family. My dad was a sales rep, my mum didn't work, not huge amounts of money, but you know, she was a very, very bright girl, and the opportunity for her to go to grammar school would have been a great step up for her. At that time in the council, they decided that what they wanted to do was take the brightest of the bright and put them into schools in the inner city to sort of help the inner city schools, which had low performance, come up and step up. I have never seen my father so animated and so driven and so purposeful ever when he heard that news of what they were going to do in the school they were going to send my sister to, and that's just always stuck with me. I think I might be wrong in terms of it's just an event, but I do think it had an influence on me as a young boy at the time. Looking at it, I'd been about 9 at the time, and I've always seen that as being yes. Then I've sort of picked the mantle and run with that. Well, exactly. So I take all the family problems, which is with us.
And I think most kids do have they have a keen sense of fairness, not always perfectly calibrated, and part of the job as a parent to kind of try and sort of calibrate that sense of fairness, because it can often be a very self-centered sense of fairness when you're a child, which is completely understandable and fair enough. But there is that, we do have that inherent drive, and about how you then encourage them to look outwards and see the unfairness in society. I guess is one of the things I try and do as a parent, in order to be able to respond and react to it and try and do something about it.
And you also learn as a parent, I think, and I've said this myself when, CEO of a law firm, regional firm, running businesses, the skill sets that I've drawn upon, it's not an MBA, it's not a marketing degree, it's not a special course that I've been on with anybody in particular switched on. It's being a parent. It's the mediation. It's the sort of the naughty steps. It's those, but in adult form, that you apply because in the greater part, unfortunately, you find in the workplace environment, quite often people do behave in a childlike way sometimes when it comes to not getting what they want, feeling that somebody else is getting more than they are, or simply just trying to be the one that gets away with as much as they can.
And at the end of the day, I mean, kids are just small humans. I mean, we're all at the end of the day on a continuum, on a spectrum of humanity, and there are similar strategies, across the board for all people.
So back. Sorry, I took a sort of journey backwards there, but I thought that was quite interesting, and I love your sort of the inconsistencies that you take as your triggers to get things and correct things, which has proven incredibly successful. I'm sure your clients are delighted that you've got that tick. But so you were Lovells for how many years was that?
I was at Lovells for 7.5 years.
Right.
I remember hearing, I don't know why it stuck with me, but I remember hearing on the radio when I was a teenager that my generation would change careers every 7 years. And I thought, that's crazy. My mum had effectively been a teacher most of her life. My dad had been a teacher and then halfway through swapped into IT. And, but that was, you did a job for kind of good. And I thought that's kind of, but I kind of slightly actually turned out to almost live that prediction.
Yeah. So you're Generation X?
I'm on the cusp. I'm on the cusp between, I can't remember, but between the 70s and the 80s. Let's put it that way.
Right. I think I'm one of the earliest Generation X's. So
when does Generation X, when does that start?
65 to 80.
Yeah. So I'm sort of right in the middle of X and Y. I'm younger than I look.
Yeah. So I mean,
which can be a benefit in my profession.
I don't mean that's correct. I just mean yes, that's where you'll be, your Generation X. But I think for me, I'm right on the cusp of having sort of the potential boomer sort of vibe as well. But interesting, and I wrote a book about this, generational diversity in the legal sector, having experienced it for 15 years. So I had two boomer senior partners that I was working with very closely, and brilliant people, great friends of mine, but very different in outlook and very different in the way that they saw things, the work ethic, what they expected from people. And to be fair to them, over time, obviously to accommodate what is happening in the workplace, adjustments have to be made. I think I was a bit of a hybrid. I wasn't really sort of boomer, and I didn't really associate much probably with the Generation X's that are there. But I think there is something in it. I think there is, each generation has its own sort of outward influences, and we can all follow the same sort of paths. We see the same television programs. We have the same cultural references. I think there is definitely something in that.
Yeah, and they talk a lot about those who would still react to a dial-up modem, and those who don't know what those beeps mean. I'm definitely on one side of that divide, and there are a lot of colleagues who, without being meaningless, no criticism of that. It's just it was never an experience in their life.
I'm living the life right now. I've got Virgin Media. It's
the active internet, but I don't know what it's like really not to have internet at all. At least once I sort of hit teenage years, that was the email was sort of getting there and building, and it just became such a feature of life, and mobile phones and everything else. Anyway.
So what drew you to Bindmans 7.5 years after?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's it's a phenomenal firm. I mean, I guess I had never expected to stay in the city sort of all of my career. I worked with a wonderful partner at Hogan Lovells, who I learned an unbelievable amount from, both in terms of the law and management, and also just being a good human. But there came a point where actually, I think it was a friend pointed out, Bindmans are advertising. I don't think at the time I necessarily understood how relatively rare that occurrence is. It's not something we do often, because we tend to bring people up internally from junior positions.
Grow your own.
Grow your own. Exactly. It's not often we have an opportunity to advertise for senior lawyers, and they obviously have an extraordinary reputation and were doing things that I guess were consistent with my own internal ethical principles and beliefs, and the desire. I don't have a problem doing law for organizations and for businesses. They require legal advice too, and very important issues around how businesses work and how they're regulated. I have no issue with any of that, but at a place like Hogan Lovells, that's effectively all you can do.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to do all of public law. I wanted to have that freedom to work for sort of anyone and individuals, NGOs, charities, businesses, sort of anyone who came through the door that needed help, that I would be able to do that. And that's what the opportunity has given me.
Could you just perhaps reference for our listeners, because I'm guilty of actually understanding a little bit more about Bindmans than the average listener perhaps, but
sure,
just explain a little bit about the sorts of things that the firm had been doing, that has currently been involved with, that they might recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bindmans is, at least according to the legal directories, one of the top public law and administrative law and civil liberties law practices. Also does extraordinary work in other areas, including personal injury and family and employment, actions against the police, crime. I think it has the highest proportion of top-ranked lawyers per head of any firm in the country. I might be wrong in that, but I think that's the kind of statistic.
I think you're correct.
It attracts and has absolutely amazing people in it, and it has Jeffrey Bindmans started it in the 70s, in part because still as a Jewish man he couldn't, I believe, my understanding is he sort of couldn't really get a role anywhere else, so he started his own firm to make a difference in society. He was involved in the General Pinochet case. The firm has been at the forefront of equalities legislation changes, and Jeffrey worked in that area a lot in terms of LGBTQ plus rights. It's been involved more recently in a lot of the Brexit related litigation, and it's been at the cutting edge of progressive, in my view, positive developments in terms of human rights, civil liberties, public law, constraining government power. I focus on those areas because they're my areas, but of course it's also done all sorts of amazing things in the other areas.
With the Grenfell disaster.
Grenfell, we're one of the leading solicitor firms within the Grenfell inquiry and the Grenfell PI litigation. It's got an extraordinary history.
Yeah.
I think there's a timeline on the website of sort of all of the major.
It is quite remarkable. And your role in particular was public law and human rights.
Yeah, so I've been the co-head of the public law and human rights team for the last 3 years or so, the team does a huge, broad range of work. We have court of protection experts, education experts, but also sort of generalist strategic public law, challenging public policy, mental health. We do human rights damages claims. So really the breadth of public law, the breadth of the intersection between the public sector and sort of private individuals and private companies. My wife always wants me to call myself a human rights lawyer because people understand what that is, which I get, but the reality is human rights is just one aspect of public law. It's one sort of tool in my toolbox, as it were, to try and achieve aims for my clients.
At the time of recording, I think the general public are going to have probably a better appreciation of human rights law than they might have done maybe several months ago if it wasn't for a certain plane sitting on the tarmac waiting for people to get on it to go to Rwanda. Do you have any involvement with that?
I think we have had some. We haven't had involvement in those particular challenges as far as like the specific challenges that have been in the news. Yeah. We've sort of been involved in some case, some of the surrounding issues that have come out of those issues, out of that policy, and out of that issue, and people affected by that or potentially affected in the future.
I mean, it was a subject that came up when we talked a little bit beforehand about the question time, question time program that I was watching only the other night, and there was a question then. It raised its head. There's a really unfortunate split within the country, which seems to have been exacerbated by this case, which is sort of reopened. Almost feels again a bit like Brexit. same schism about the way in which immigration is a divisive point and a political football that's being used.
Yes.
Actually, when you look and you break it down and you see that that was supposed to be a plane full of immigrants, it's now we whittle it down to less than 10 and then 0. When you look at the individual cases, these are people who are in distress, who do face, severe repercussions if they were to be, deported, returned home. It's just not. It's not realistic to me at face value. It just instinctively feels wrong. Not a lawyer, certainly not a human rights specialist, and with what's happening now with the European Court's intervention, that's now being also used as a, well, how can these people tell us what to do? And I just think it's incredibly unfortunate. I just think it's.
I couldn't agree with you more, David. I find it, it is one of those issues where I do. I try and find common ground. I try and understand where other people are coming from, because I think that's important. But I just genuinely find it difficult to understand how you look at that situation and you think, oh, well, human rights have gone too far, or, we must get out of this. And you sort of just think, and, maybe this is a bit trite, but you think about why we have a human rights court, why we signed up. This was something that developed out of the worst atrocities humanity has ever seen in World War II. And this was something where we said, actually, we don't necessarily all, as individual countries, we don't always know best.
Yeah.
We're not always right. And actually, we need to kind of look to each other and support each other and work together to kind of recognize basic standards for humanity,
checks and balances,
exactly. And that you can't always do that alone, and that for me applies at an individual level as much as it does at a state-based level. And the idea that we will walk away from something because we have some unique or some special right as Britain to understand human rights, and we must be entitled to do that alone. I just find that a deeply depressing concept.
And the thought that the whole situation has been created because of a mechanism to potentially deflect from a focus on a particular leader of the government right now, or find a way to garner support within his own party makes it even worse. But anyway,
it does. And there is a suggestion, all of this policy was partly designed to try to bring back the idea that we could get out of the Human Rights Act, because they had resigned from that. So the Tories had stepped back a little from that precipice for a period. But now this has put it on the agenda. And
so your job has been, in part, not in whole, but in part, to hold organizations, not least the government, to account. And as a mechanism that you use on a regular basis, which I think you are particularly conversant with and have used to good effect, and that's the judicial review. Is it possible to give a brief outline of what a judicial review is?
Yeah. In the very simplest terms, it is the means by which the court exercises sort of oversight and supervision of the legality of what public authorities do.
Yeah.
And there are, over time it's been developed through the common law. So there are various principles, ultra vires, which just means, is it in accordance with the law? Is it irrational? Not irrational in a way you and I would understand it as normal human beings, but in a legal sense, that means, is it a decision that no reasonable decision maker could ever have come to? It's, it's an extremely high bar. Have you broken a promise? And if you've broken a promise, was there a proper reason for you doing that? You've then got human rights arguments. You've got sort of, have you complied with statute and the purpose of statute? There are various arguments, but the system is designed for potentially good sort of philosophical reasons to make it really difficult to challenge public authorities.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the myth the government like to peddle is that somehow it's easy to challenge government, too easy to challenge government, and this is some sort of significant fetter on what they can do, and it's gone too far. I can assure you, it's really, really not easy.
Yeah.
And a lot of cases, and there's many hurdles you have to overcome to even get to your final hearing in court. And then when you're there, you know, it's still more likely than not that you will lose. You know, you can't always predict exactly which case. That's the nature of the law, but the general stats are you will lose. So this idea that this is some sort of, you know, terrible fetter on government, it just doesn't accord with my own experience.
You were involved in a case, if I'm right, with regards to the treatment in COVID. Some of the ways in which the government put out the measures,
yes,
as the pandemic was hit. And I think one of the areas in which you focused, or you were looking at, was exercise for children.
Yeah.
Explain very briefly about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. We were looking at the right, particularly children on the autism spectrum, or children with mental health conditions, and also adults with mental health conditions that for whom, you know, exercising once a day simply wasn't a proportionate, wasn't a proportionate restriction. They had a greater need, and the application of a sort of one size fits all policy, simply wasn't right in any sense of the word, in my view, in that particular case. And the government, to the credit, we wrote to them, and they changed the policy, quite rightly. But I mean, if I may, that was a real eye opener, I guess, to the kind of divisiveness in society that you have identified. Because if there was any case where I didn't expect to receive abuse, it might have been that one. But it's the only time in my career I actually received direct email abuse. And I also made the foolish mistake of reading below the line on various news articles. And the response from those keyboard warriors was extraordinary. Most of them anonymous, of course. And that I was somehow undermining the effort to control the pandemic, and these children should just be made to run up and down the stairs, which is an interesting presumption that they even had stairs to run up and down. But it was extraordinary. I mean, it's taught me never to read below the line, and never to try and predict how the public might react to a particular policy or a particular challenge. You really can't know.
Were these random sort of? I don't suppose you did much analysis on this. Doesn't bear much consideration.
No.
Random, not bots that were being stewed up by somebody.
No, I don't think so. And this was actually most of the below the line reading I did was in the legal press. So people who bother to read the Law Gazette, and then respond to it.
I suppose the best we could do is put it down to some sort of pandemic anxiety.
I understand that. There is an element. But then to take that and to actually then sort of turn that into abuse of, well, particularly the families and the children involved, for me, I struggle to understand it. I'll be honest.
It is bizarre. It is really quite bizarre. And in those cases, there are you've worked on. You've also had some other sort of very headline-grabbing situations. There was a group of workers who were picketing for rights. They were called the Shrewsbury 24, I think it was.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
It was in the early 70s.
73.
And simply through the process they were going through, because they had a building development work that was going on, and builders were suffering injury and
weren't paid fairly. Yeah.
So they were picketing for the rights to be able to be heard, for their paying conditions to be improved, and it all went a bit sour for them, which ended up in actual criminal prosecutions and imprisonment.
No arrest, or possibly just one, I can't remember. Almost no arrest on the day itself. Police were there no arrests. Then suddenly, weeks later, the police go around and arrest these individuals who were alleged to be the ringleaders for the pickets and alleged violence and all sorts of things, and ended up in in three criminal trials. And most of them were convicted, and some of them did jail time as a result. You know, I know one who missed the birth of a daughter as a result. You know, absolutely devastating stuff.
I think the worrying part of this as well was and this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it was proven, I think, in the case last year where the evidence was put forward, that there was a number of agencies, government-related agencies, that actually worked to bring these prosecutions to basically.
That's certainly what I mean. I'm not sure I could say it was proven, but you know, there was
you got to be careful
in the papers. There was a committee of very dedicated people who spent years and years, and particularly their secretary Eileen Turnbull did extraordinary research in the National Archives and found all of these records that. Yeah, and there were programs, and at the time, obviously, it was at the time of the real red under the bed fear, the communist sort of fear, and there were TV programs broadcast at the time, kind of implicating these strikes in the communist movement, and this is a threat to our society, and there are notes that sort of link things that happened in the trial and the broadcast, all the way up to the senior levels of government, which was really concerning. But ultimately it was one particular note that referred to the destruction of evidence, the destruction of the first round of witness statements that the defense never got told about at the time. And of course we don't know what was in those statements. Maybe it was it's possible as perfect part of a perfectly proper process, and I genuinely don't know, but it was something that the defense should have been entitled to question the police about at the time, but they didn't know about it, and so that rendered their convictions unsafe all these years, or almost 50 years later.
These guys have gone through through their careers.
For a lot of them, this has hung over their heads. They can't. The places they couldn't travel because they had criminal convictions. Some of them died before they got this justice. It was an absolute travesty.
I think what it's a great demonstration of, though, and it's heartbreaking for those involved, but what it's a great demonstration of is justice being served. Ultimately, it's very, very late in the day, but it's been done. And for those who have survived, there's some rest, at least some peace that they've actually for those that have passed on, that there is some resolution. And that's part of the process. It's not all about the current. It's not all about the here and now. There are injustices that have happened in the past. And I think that's, to your credit and to the legal team that was involved in it, and those that support. I think Ricky Tomlinson, the actor, was one of the.
Yeah, he was involved. He wasn't one of my clients. At the end, there were a couple of legal teams, but we were leading the kind of challenge, Collect Bindmans, and the barristers involved. Did a phenomenal job.
So here's a nice simple question. What would you think would be the biggest challenge you've faced in your career?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I've been reflecting that a bit on that with the move, and sort of also talking to over time with management and looking at other people. And I'm not sure it's something you're almost conscious of at the time, but there's a shift in your career, which comes with a shift from lawyer to lawyer manager. And not only teaches you how to be a manager, and I think you're promoted because you're good at doing law, and then you're suddenly expected to manage people. But also part of that shift, part of underlying that shift, is a shift from I'm not sure these are quite the right words, but a shift from kind of control to responsibility. You don't necessarily feel like it when you're a lawyer, when you're a junior lawyer, but actually you have a lot of control. You're actually the one who's on top of the detail.
Yeah.
You know, you're the one doing the day-to-day communications. You're the one doing the research and writing the notes and doing the first drafts of things. And you actually know everything. Maybe it's almost knowledge. You know everything that's going on. And then as you sort of, and as most people who are lawyers, not everyone obviously, but I think there is, you know, we are people who like information. We're people who like control. We like to be on top of things.
Yeah.
But as you get more senior, you no longer have the almost time to have that control. You have too much. You have to trust other people. You have to let your team do their jobs.
Yeah.
And you can't be across all the detail. You can't be doing all the day-to-day communications. You're there for strategy. You're there for guidance. You're there to support and help. But you don't have that control. But what you do have is, quite rightly, the ultimate responsibility for everything that happens. Actually, when you're the junior lawyer, again, if you're in a good team with a good manager, you shouldn't have that ultimate responsibility. Again, rightly, you need that freedom. So, but that shift can be quite daunting, can feel quite overwhelming. I've got to know less, but be responsible for more.
Does that happen suddenly for you in your?
No,
role?
I think it's a shift over time, and I'm not always sure you're exactly conscious of why you feel that way, and it's sort of something I've probably only come to understand more in reflecting on it, and perhaps talking to people who are a little bit earlier in the journey and who are perhaps starting out and who are saying, well, how did you do that? How do you cope with not knowing everything? How do you sort of have more cases but sort of know less about each of them? And and it's just sort of that feeling of, as I've said to people, I mean, it's a feeling I have almost every day of being out of my depth, and you don't always know exactly why, and you don't always know exactly sort of how to fix it. But if what you want to be, and again, there are definitely other ways of dealing, having a career and dealing with life, but I can't help but want to kind of keep trying something new and keep trying to be more, and therefore you've got to learn to live with this uncertainty and live with this feeling of, I'm out of my depth here, but I trust myself to work, to kind of work it out and get to the other side or get to the outcome.
And I think we all go through our own different experiences, but I think it's entirely normal for somebody in that situation. It would be the same if that individual had been in paid employment, decided to then set up their own venture and do their own thing, because you're in an alien environment, and suddenly everything's resting on your shoulders as opposed to taking a paycheck every month.
Yes. And definitely not unique to law. That's just the domain I understand best.
And you are now taking a new venture from, there's an organization who has been a client of yours, Good Law Project. I'm very familiar with. I'm not sure whether our audience would be. I'd hope they would be. Have been doing amazing things along the same vein as we've been talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And you are to take a new venture with that organization. Could you perhaps just provide a little bit of an insight into the Good Law Project and the types of things that they're doing, and why you've been attracted to work with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Good Law Project is an organization that was set up by Jolyon Maugham QC, and he was one of the individuals involved in a lot of the early Brexit related litigation. And it's been sort of set up to fill a sort of, I guess, a lacuna in public law, to hold government and other public authorities, and potentially in the future other bits of the powerful in society, to account, to use the law to hold them to account, to make society a better place. And they've sort of, at the moment, they have three sort of main strands in which they focus on. They focus on good governance, trying to tackle this government's cronyism, and allegations of jobs and money for friends through the pandemic and in other situations, trying to tackle environmental issues and trying to tackle no one left behind, the most vulnerable in society that don't have people to speak for them, and to provide an organization that can use the law but can also combine that with campaigning expertise in order to bring about change. They have, they have critics, but in my view they have done a phenomenal job in that area, to somewhat fill the gap between legal aid, which has been increasingly restricted over the years, and sort of commercial public law, and to try and increase accountability in society, which in my view can only be a good thing.
I think you nailed it there with filling the gap. I mean, without Jolyon and without the Good Law Project, you've got Bindmans, but as a law firm, could you just take on your case?
No, I mean it's tricky, quite. We and this is in no way a criticism of Bindmans, and obviously there are other excellent law firms out there too doing this work, and people making real sacrifices, but at the end of the day, we it is a profit-making enterprise, as most law firms are, and we do. Bindmans does a lot that doesn't make a profit, in a kind of traditional, in a sense, legal aid is, the rates are incredibly low and they don't cover costs, but it therefore has to do other work that does cover costs, and other private work, but GLP is a not-for-profit. It reinvests all its funding sort of back into the work it does, and the practice we're setting up will join that not-for-profit group. I won't be drawing, I will be drawing a salary, but I will no longer be a partner drawing a profit.
And so the Good Law practice is the venture we're talking about here, which will aim to support the Good Law Project.
Yes.
And assist with their work. But the sort of matters are going to be the same, in line of holding the government to account.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a firm sort of set up with consistent values. I ascribe to those values, and the firm ascribes to those values. So we'll be looking to support Good Law Project and its partner organisations and individuals it's working with to hold government and public authorities to account.
I love the sort of that three words, that bravery, honesty, and decisiveness.
Yes,
which is what the Good Law Project is about. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah,
because that's what you want. And I think along the same vein, but in more detail, Stephen, Mr. Nolan's principles of public life, which I also think are, and in honesty, I always talk to, when I'm having discussions with business owners, the adoption of that. Because there are 7 principles that are to set out the roadmap for the way in which you should perform, you should act in public office. But I actually think it goes further than that.
Absolutely.
Everybody should be following.
It's just a guide to being a good human.
Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership.
Yeah.
If people don't understand what the Nolan principles are, please Google them, check them out, because there is the detail behind that. And allegedly, everybody in public office, including our government, should be working to those principles. And if we look about the resignation of 2, not 1, but 2 ethics advisors to the Prime Minister, something's not quite working. And this isn't meant to be a political, but I am apolitical. I do not follow any particular colour, any particular political party. I just see what I see, and it's not just doing the right thing. You're not just you've got to be seen to be doing the right thing. You've got to be actually doing the right thing. And if you've got an ethics advisor, if you've got somebody behind you who's saying, "I can't condone this. This is not something I can sign up to," there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I think you're absolutely right. Those are principles for life, and they're particularly principles for management. They're they're exactly what you should, in my view, what you should be as a manager. And and underlying all of those, and it's not, well, it's accountability. It's about, I tend to use the word responsibility. You take responsibility. Buck stops with you, and you take the consequences when you step up, and you are a leader and you are a manager, and your team needs to know you have their back whatever happens. And they get the credit for when things go right, and you take the flak when things go wrong. That is the role of a leader and a manager. And yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm apolitical. I do say to my clients, don't presume what I believe. I have political views, but you'll get the same service. I have worked for people or organizations across a large part of the political spectrum, from the far left to the what's traditionally called the far left to the center right. Don't presume I agree with you. I'll give you a great service. But it is hard to see in current public life accountability and responsibility at the forefront, and that is sad and depressing.
Very much so. Very much so. So, new role. What do you see as your main priorities?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, my main priority is just building a sustainable core of a public interest law firm that externally is making a positive difference in society, and that internally is providing a supportive environment for employees to develop and challenge themselves. And I want us to be agile. I want us to be responsive to changes in the working environment, in the wider political environment, and to also identify and respond to both the successes and failures we have, because we will have both.
I think it's so needed, because what I've seen as well in the legal sector in the UK is there are certain areas of law, and it's ever was thus, that there are certain areas of law that become popular because it's very, there's a lot of work in that area, and you can demand a high salary, and people. But in general terms, there are certain areas of law where fewer and fewer people are taking an interest in because there's no money in it. It actually is. I mean, it's a fallacy for a lot of parents, unfortunately, to believe that if their young ones are wanting to take a career in law, they're going to be wealthy and they're going to have, the Porsches or the whatever, the big house, the holidays abroad. Hello, reality check. It's not actually like that. For a few people, it might well be if you're really successful, but you could work really hard and still only just sort of in maybe a 30 grand salary and be grateful for it. And that's exemplified as well, or exemplified by certain areas of law which are niche but incredibly important to holding people to account. If it being the environmental area, if it in criminal as well, a lot of people deciding that actually, hang on, so time out, guys, I'm going to retrain and do probate because there's no money in this criminal law game. So I think you afford, although you can't employ everybody, obviously you can provide an incubator to bring on talent.
It's definitely been the hope. Training the lawyers of the future has always been a big part of what I wanted to do in my career, and I've been lucky to kind of supervise trainees since very early, since I was a couple of years qualified. So I've worked with some absolutely brilliant people who, no thanks to me, they were brilliant anyway, but have gone on to do fantastic stuff. But I'd like to be part of providing the environment of the practice to do that. But Bindmans does it too. It's not a unique thing, but it's a very important thing, and it may not be unique, but as you say, it is a niche area, and it's not easy to achieve. But it is really important.
And for those people who have, let's say, they've suffered injustice, or they're thinking that there's no route for them, they don't understand, they've not heard about the Good Law Project, and they're wanting to, they're either going to have to give up the fight or look around. What advice would you give somebody? What should they do?
Oh, look, I mean, that's such a tough question, David, because it's, there is the honest answer is there is simply not enough support in society for those people. And, we will, you have to contact, you contact organizations like Good Law Project, you contact law firms like Bindmans, but you have to be prepared that they may not be able to take you on. We simply don't have the capacity. Those organizations that don't expect us to practice, we can't, we're not going to be able to fix anything. I'd need a team of thousands to deal with all of the injustice in society. And that simply doesn't exist.
Is there greater weight in a group action? If it's something that is affecting.
Yeah, I mean, there can be. Our legal system isn't really set up for that. I mean, but in example action, I guess a lot of the work I do is done for individuals or organizations, but has a wider benefit for the groups to which they belong. That's sort of how that's almost for me the definition of strategic judicial review or strategic public law, which is sort of how I define my expertise or specialism. Is that it's sort of doing work that has a wider benefit rather than just a particular instance of individual unfairness. There are people who do that individual work, which is incredibly important. It's just not what I necessarily how my career has developed. So I haven't really managed to give any advice. It's more of I wish the system were different, and we need to be fighting for a different system. And actually, you need to, people in society need to recognize that they may not identify with Rwandan, let's just circle back, they may not identify with Rwandan asylum seekers, but actually at the end of the day, those are just people who have found themselves in an incredibly difficult and traumatic situation. And any of us, not that situation, because we'll find ourselves in that situation, but any of us can find ourselves in a difficult, traumatic situation. And when you're in that situation, you want a system that can support you, and that can provide you with legal advice and provide you with expert legal help. And that's why legal aid matters. It may not feel like it matters to you now, and maybe it never will, but there's some chance it will. And when you need it and it's not there, that's when it really, that's when it will really hurt. And it's the unfortunate short-termism of politics that legal aid doesn't, it doesn't cut through, because most people think, well, I don't need it. But you just never know when you cannot
predict what's going to happen, what's around the corner. We're living in very strange times, aren't we? And around the corner. One of the final questions for you, for those individuals that are thinking about a career in law, what sage advice could you impart? Another cracker. It's another cracker.
I think, am I allowed to answer a different question?
Of course you are.
Which is, once you're in it, no, I should try and answer that question. What sage advice? I think you sort of need to work out what you're looking for from your career. What kind of what do you want? What kind of person are you? Do you sort of want to be brilliant at one thing? Are you the kind of person that wants to take one particular thing and become the best possible person at it, or do you want to be constantly evolving and trying new things? How comfortable are you feeling out of your depth? How, is that something you can live with? How comfortable are you with uncertainty, both over what your career might look like, but also over the money you get paid, and how things might develop? There's no judgment. I don't have any judgment about anyone's answers to those questions. There are no right answers, but it's who you are, because that then affects. And then you need to try and understand, well, what is it in the legal, what is available in the legal market, and how do I meet that? Sort of, how do I kind of find the best place for me as a human, be me as a person? That has the level of safety and the level of risk that I'm comfortable with, that will give me the opportunity to either, sort of do the same thing over and over again, and not in a bad way, but and become brilliant and be the best person, or to be someone who is kind of moving and constantly looking for something new. Because there is so much out there, and as you say, people think city, and that's or commercial or barrister, or but there's so much diversity within the profession. There's so many different options and so many different ways of working, and I think it can be easy when you're young to think, well, I want to be high profile, I want to be the person that's doing the biggest deal in the city or doing the most high profile litigation. But that comes with costs and negatives as well, and you've got to try and look a bit deeper and think, actually, what do I really want? And those people aren't necessarily making positive change. They might be, again, anyway. Sorry, that's a bit of a ramble. But
no, that's not at all. I think, it very much follows. I was once involved in, I was invited, somebody somehow found me on LinkedIn and decided that I used to go to a particular school, so therefore they were looking for people. They must have been desperate. They were looking for people to hand out the prizes, their school prize giving, and to give a speech. They picked me. So I went back to Gloucester. I had a nice tour around the school, got a bit of PTSD from detention times and all the rest of it that I used to get when I was there. And part of the tour, I got shown into the assembly area, and there were 90 students, all in uniform, co-ed. It was all boys when I was there, but it's co-ed. And the business manager said, school business manager said, okay, are you ready to give your talk now? Nobody had mentioned this. There's a talk at the end of the day. I know I have to give a speech I've done no preparation for. So I had to think on my feet, and I just said, right. I went around the whole lot of them, which I thought would buy a bit of time, to ask their name and if they had an idea what they wanted to do for a career, and if not that, something of interest that maybe other people didn't know. Off you go. The thing that was staggering, Jamie, is that nearly every single one of those, how old would they be, 16-year-olds, they knew what they wanted to do, or they had an imprint of what they wanted to do for a career. And there were quite a few lawyers. And I thought, how at that age do you know that that's what you want to do? Because I had no idea. I was still evolving early into my mid-20s beyond, and you might argue even now I haven't worked out what I'm doing. But we evolve. And to have that set, and I think part of that is the university education and the fees for universities. Parents are thinking, if you're going to pay back your university education, you need to get a job that will help you to do that. Accountant, lawyer, pharmacist, rocket scientist. And we did have a rocket scientist. So when I went around the group, and when I got those answers, I just then reverted back to what I believe and what I've said to my kids. Do what you have an interest in, passionate about. And it's pretty much what you're saying. We all have different personalities. We all have different styles and preferences. And to find yourself working in an area which really does not make the most of those skills and attributes and preferences, you're going to have some very, very uncomfortable Monday mornings on a rainy day when you have to pull off the duvet and jump, and get in and commute your way to work, or work from home even if you're doing that. It's not going to be great. And you could be at work a long time if you're lucky enough to continue to work for a long time. So the idea for me was all about passion, and there's no reason why you can't have passion in the legal world. You're a great demonstration of being passionate about what you do, and the injustice that triggers that fits with the areas in which you followed. And for me, that makes an awful lot of sense. So if you look at the makeup, you look at your own makeup, and you look at what suits it, then there's a multitude of jobs in the legal profession that would suit various different roles. And you see it, don't you, in a practice?
Absolutely.
You see you're working with some people and you think that individual is probably on the spectrum. I don't know whether they've been diagnosed, but they are incredibly, incredibly good at working in great detail, and they're working in this particular way. And then you've got a gregarious one that's probably a little bit light on the detail, but he's fabulous at going out and bringing in the clients.
Exactly. You need a real variety, and
you do. So actually, that's really answered the question. And in terms of advice for people in business as well, because that's something that I think is often overlooked when you get to a partner level in a business and you're effectively part owner of a business. And now you're very much stepping into almost it is a startup.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice that you could share with their audience for taking such steps, maybe some due diligence, or from a legal perspective, things that they should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think due diligence is important. You've got to work out what that involves for you. You've got to work out you've got to kind of identify what your risks are and what's important. I think certainly doing something like this, this is, which is a sort of partnership between me and Good Law Project, and having some external legal advice of your own, just to make sure your interests are protected if you're working with other people and with other groups, making sure you do sometimes it can sometimes be quite easy to kind of get caught up in the excitement and sort of in the detail and of what you're doing and getting it done, and sometimes you've got to take a step back. These things are sometimes long in incubation, and you can you make a decision at the beginning, yes, this is a path I want to go down, but in the time you're thinking about it, circumstances change, your personal circumstances change, the wider world changes.
Yeah.
You've got to take a step back and say, am I still the right person to do this? Is this still the thing I want? Is this still the right thing for me? And often, hopefully the answer will be yes, but I still think it's really important that you ask those questions, and you have that ability not to feel sort of trapped into a path just because it's something you've started down.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have open conversations with those you're working with about your concerns.
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to the Nolan principles. You have to have the openness and honesty. All those things are. I
think that's so important, Jamie. That's excellent, because I had a conversation only yesterday with actually I was on Wednesday having a conversation with somebody else on a podcast, and they were talking, a business owner of a financial planning business, and his success has been born out of a self-awareness and ability to identify that actually they're not going to be the best at everything. And that's exactly the point you're making earlier about having horses for courses, knowing where their strengths lay, and then understanding if there was a particular skill required in the job that he had, and it wasn't actually coming second nature to him. How can you improve on that? How can you work on that? And every day is a school day.
Exactly.
Taking that view that you know it all and do it all, because there lies the route to disaster.
It does. I think that's so important, and it's so, it's certainly something a trap I fell into at the beginning of my career, of trying to be someone else, looking at someone who was successful and trying to be them.
Yeah.
And actually you're not them, and you never will be. And that's that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So don't try, look at the bits you like of them, look at the bits you don't like, discard the bits you don't like, and then look at the bits you like and think, right, which of those fit with me? Which of those chime with me? And then discard the bits that don't chime with you, but do that with lots of people, and it's always a constant kind of, actually, God, that person does that so much better than me. How can I not necessarily do it the same way they do, but how can I achieve what they've achieved given who I am as a person? Or how can I help my team to make sure we achieve that as a whole? What do we need? What are we missing?
Brilliant. I mean, you've given a great deal of your time, Jamie, and it's been a fascinating conversation. I wish you all the very best with this very exciting new venture. You are the man for the job, because having met you and understand the work and your great works at Bindmans, your supporting of the Good Law Project already, it's a brilliant fit. I will continue to support both projects and your career, and wish you all the very best with it. And thank you very much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, David.